what's really disappointing, I think, is that that letter was sent by the Permanent Secretary to Labour 2 days ago, and yet this line of it's independent and being assessed by civil services being repeated by ministers and indeed the Prime Minister, a former Chancellor, yesterday and today, and that's really disappointing. Ministers actually have an obligation under the Ministerial Code to protect the impartiality of the civil service, which means not making the sort of comments that there have been today about talking about this being an independent analysis.
This election is about the future, and I'm clear that I'm going to keep cutting people's taxes, as we now are. You want to put everyone's taxes up by £2,000, and this is really important. Yeah. Independent Treasury officials have costed Labour's policies, and they amount to a £2,000 tax rise for every working family. No, this is important. Mark my words. Labour will raise your taxes. It's in their DNA. Your work, your car, your pension.
Thank you. OK,
you name it, Labour will tax it.
The Conservatives say that they have collected policies which the Labour Party is committed to, which the Labour Party disputes, which amounts to some £40 billion, which if you divide that by every family in the country over 4 years, that's how you get to the £2,000 figure. But the fact that the most senior civil servant at the Treasury has had to intervene, writing a letter making clear that the assessment should not be presented as having been produced by the civil service, has caused quite the political row. Labour's John Ashworth saying it's a slam dunk proof of Rishi Sunak's big desperate lie. Rishi Sunak has posted a video online repeating it. Well, let's now speak to the General Secretary of the FDA union, which represents civil servants, Dave Penman. Hello, Dave.
Good afternoon.
It's normal in these times that we wouldn't be speaking during an election campaign because civil servants are impaired and they wouldn't be getting involved in an election campaign. The Conservatives have released this document, which they call Labour's tax rises, which they say is based on calculations by the Treasury. So what's the problem?
So I think there's a couple of things here. One, the civil service isn't independent. The civil service serves the government of the day and does what it's instructed to do within the rules that are set under the Civil Service Code. And these kind of assessments that are done of opposition policies, and Labour have done this in the past as well, are based on assumptions that special advisors and ministers make. So they say, we think Labour are going to do this based on what they've said, and ask Treasury officials to try and cost it. So it's based on political assertions. And yes, Treasury civil servants are involved in it, but you can't say that it's an independent assessment. And as you've seen from the letter from the Permanent Secretary of the Treasury, civil servants are really uncomfortable at being dragged into this kind of political mess and claim and counterclaim about opposition policies, because they could well be serving a Labour Party if elected at the next election. So it's really unfair of ministers to use this process in this way and to keep repeating this lie that it's a kind of independent assessment of Labour's policies.
And the point you've made is that this is not the first. You know, the Labour government did exactly the same thing, but your point is that you shouldn't present it as being independent because they are merely doing the bidding, if you like, of their political masters.
Exactly. I mean, the assumptions that underpin these calculations are set by ministers and special advisors. I mean, to be honest, it's probably not a practice that should continue. I think it inevitably lends itself to abuse in an election period when ministers perhaps are more tempted than at other times to cross a line on this. But it's really important for ministers. What's really disappointing, I think, is that that letter was sent by the Permanent Secretary to Labour 2 days ago, and yet this line of it's independent and being assessed by civil services being repeated by ministers and indeed the Prime Minister, a former Chancellor, yesterday and today, and that's really disappointing. Ministers actually have an obligation under the Ministerial Code to protect the impartiality of the civil service, which means not making the sort of comments that there have been today about talking about this being an independent analysis. So not only were they warned and told about this a couple of days ago, because they will have seen that letter from the Permanent Secretary before it was sent, but also they have their own rules that say don't drag the civil service into this kind of political row.
Dave, good to speak to you. Dave Penman there from the FDA union, which represents civil servants. We've also heard from ITV in the last few minutes. They say a peak of 5.5 million people tuned in for the Sunak versus Starmer ITV debate. almost 2 million more than watched the Conservative Prime Minister debate in 2022.
A lot of money when I was growing up, and we were in a position on occasion where we couldn't pay our bills. So I know how that feels. In our particular case, we had our phone cut off because we didn't have the money. So I do know the anguish of worrying when the postman comes with a bill. What is that bill going to be? Can I pay for it?
Are you saying
I don't think the Prime Minister quite understands the position that you and other people are in. We will raise specific taxes, and we've been really clear what they are. We've already dealt with the tax break on private schools. We want to end the non-dom status completely. I think that the super-rich should be paying their tax. I want to get rid of the equity loopholes that are there, again, for the super-rich. And I think the oil and gas companies should be paying their fair share towards our energy. So we will raise those, but we won't raise the others.
Rishi Sunak.
Yes, well, we have already scrapped the non-dom regime and we have a 75%
Not
windfall
in
tax
full, you've left a
on
loophole.
energy companies. But independent Treasury civil servants have costed Labour's policies, and it's £2,000. But you asked for specifics, Julie. So let's have a specific difference.
Please let Mr Sunak finish.
The triple lock plus. So that we raise the personal allowance for pensioners and ensure that the state pension is never subject to tax. That's what you'll get under a future Conservative government. Keir Starmer hasn't matched that pledge, which means for the first time in our country's history, if Labour are elected, pensioners will pay tax. As Janet knows and everyone knows, the NHS is still recovering from COVID. We went through the best part of 2 years where the NHS couldn't conduct all the treatments it normally would, and it is going to take time to recover from that. But we are now making progress. The waiting lists are coming down. But what Keir Starmer didn't mention to you, which you did, Julie.
Waiting list 7.2 million, they're now 7.5 million. He says they're coming down, and this is the guy who says he's good at maths.
Yeah, they are now coming down. They are now coming down.
7.2 when you said you get them down. 7.2 million, they're now 7.5 million. I'd like you to explain how they're coming down.
Because they were coming down from where they were when they were higher.
7.2.
And they're now on their way down. They are down, right? Yes, because the NHS was impacted by industrial action. And if it wasn't for that, 500,000 appointments would have been saved.
So it's somebody else's fault.
No. But
if you had loved ones on a long waiting list for surgery, would you, if you felt that that was the only way forward, use private healthcare? Rishi Sunak.
Yes.
Keir Starmer.
No.
Absolutely no if your loved one was on a waiting list for surgery.
No.
Thank you very much.
I don't use private health. Okay. I use the NHS. That's where my wife works, in one of the big hospitals. As I say, it runs through my DNA.
OK, thank you. We've had the answers to that very clearly.
And, of course, we're going to tackle climate change and get to net zero. This election is about how we do it. And I don't think that British people should solve a global problem all by themselves, which is why I'm also prioritising our country's energy security and your bills. We've heard a lot about the cost of living challenges today. So I have made some decisions, bold decisions, that will mean that we can save all of you thousands of pounds, still meet our targets, and we can ensure our country's energy security. The contrast is clear at this election, because Keir Starmer will reverse all of the changes I've made. That's going to cost everyone and you thousands of pounds and make our country less energy secure by banning North Sea energy.
OK.
And that, I don't think, is a right course for our country.
Thank you, Keir Starmer.
This £2,000 he keeps saying it's going to cost is absolute garbage. We won't go into the details of it. But, Claire, let me address your point, because this is really important. A transition is coming that's very important when it comes, for example, to energy, a transition to renewables. I don't think we should just see that as a challenge. It's a huge opportunity, because if we go to renewable energy, that means cheaper bills. Renewables are cheaper, not just for the short term, but for the long term. It gives us energy security, so it means that Putin can't put his boot on our throat, and the result you've all been feeling for the last 2 years. But it also gives us the next generation of jobs. Other countries have realised renewables is the future. They're in the race. I want the UK to be in the race. I want us to win the race. And when it comes to hydrogen, offshore wind, solar, nuclear, the question I ask is why not?
Thank you very much. That's 45 seconds, Keir Starmer. We're going to try and stick to the rules if we can.
Over the last 12 months, the number of crossings are down a third, because the plans we put in place are starting to make a difference. But the choice of this election is about the future. I believe you need to have a deterrent. The only way to stop this problem is to say to people who come here illegally, they cannot stay and they will be removed. If I'm your Prime Minister, the planes will go to Rwanda, we will have a deterrent. So the simple question for Keir Starmer is, what will you do with people who come here illegally? What will you do with them? Well, very simply, what will you do with them? That's what I'm going to do. We'll have a deterrent. What are you going to do?
We need to smash the gangs that are running this vile trade, making a huge amount of money, putting some of the most vulnerable people in boats across the Channel. They're making a fortune. Before I was a politician, Stephen, I was the Director of Public Prosecutions, and I worked with the police and prosecutors in other countries to bring down terrorist gangs who are running across borders. I do not believe it's impossible to bring down these gangs. What I won't do is engage in an expensive gimmick, the Rwanda scheme. If he believed it was going to work, he wouldn't have called an election before it can be tested. He wouldn't have done it.
What do you do with illegal migrants who...
Would you consider processing asylum claims in a third country, Keir Starmer?
Yes, if that was possible to do it in compliance with international law, of course. But just let me deal with this, because...
So you do now agree?
OK, so you...
Honestly,
now, you've just changed your
thought we would not go to talk over each other.
So you do now agree with third country deals?
Clear, that is a yes.
I've been crystal clear. I will choose our country's security ahead of membership of a foreign court every single time.
Very clear answer. Keir Starmer, respond to that directly to Rishi Sunak, please.
No, if I'm Prime Minister, we will not pull out of international agreements and international law, which is respected the world over.